My name is Deanna Roberts, and at 67 years old, I never imagined my own son would abandon me on the streets of a small Italian town with no passport, limited cash, and a dead cell phone. Jack and his wife, Grace, thought they were teaching me a lesson about independence. Instead, they learned one about consequences. While they enjoyed their extended European vacation, I was making arrangements back home. By the time they returned to America, the locks were changed on the house they thought was theirs. Before I tell you what happened in that little Italian village, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from today. Hit that subscribe button if you believe family should never betray family. Jack was all I had after my husband Richard died of a heart attack when Jack was only 7 years old. For 20 years, it was just the two of us against the world. I taught middle school English while juggling single parenthood, stretching every dollar to make sure Jack had opportunities. We lived in a modest apartment in Boston, but our home was rich with laughter books and the occasional splurge on Red Sox tickets when I could manage it. Jack was a bright, sensitive boy who grew into a thoughtful young man. At least, that's what I believed. When Jack met Grace at a work conference 8 years ago, he was completely smitten. I was thrilled when he brought her home to meet me. She was charming, beautiful, and seemed genuinely interested in our family stories. She asked questions about Richard, complimented my teaching career, and even suggested we start a tradition of Sunday dinners together. For the first year of their relationship, Grace was everything I could have hoped for in a daughter-in-law. She sent thoughtful birthday cards, remembered my favorite flowers, and always insisted I join their holiday plans. The wedding was small but lovely. I emptied my modest savings account to help pay for it, wanting them to start their life together without debt. Grace hugged me tightly that day, whispering, "You are the mother I always wished I had." Those words meant everything to me. The shift was gradual. About 2 years into their marriage, the housing market crashed, and Jack and Grace were struggling to buy their first home. The starter houses in decent Boston neighborhoods were still beyond their reach, even with their combined salaries. Jack was working in marketing, and Grace had a job in pharmaceutical sales. They made good money, but as I would later discover, they spent it even faster. When they found a beautiful colonial in a suburb 20 minutes outside the city, Jack called me devastated that they were going to lose it to another buyer. Without hesitation, I offered to help. I had just retired and received my pension lump sum. I provided nearly 60% of the down payment with one condition, that my name would be on the deed as co-owner. This was actually Grace's suggestion. "It protects all of us," she explained. "If anything happens to Jack or me, you would still have rights to the property. Plus, it helps with the mortgage approval." What I didn't understand then was that being on the deed gave me equal ownership rights. I wasn't just a guarantor, I was a legal owner. This detail would become crucially important later. After helping them secure the house, I used most of my remaining savings to convert the property's detached garage into a small apartment for myself. It was a perfect arrangement, or so I thought. I had my independence, but was close enough to be part of their daily lives and eventually help with grandchildren. The first cracks in our relationship appeared shortly after I moved into my garage apartment. Grace began complaining about privacy, even though I was scrupulous about calling before visiting the main house. Jack started canceling our weekly lunch dates. When I did see them, they often referenced expenses or purchases they were struggling to afford, despite their comfortable salaries. I later discovered credit card statements accidentally delivered to the main house instead of my apartment. They were spending enormous amounts on designer clothes, expensive restaurants, and luxury items. Grace had a particular weakness for handbags that cost more than a month of my pension. Jack seemed unable to deny her anything. 3 months ago, Grace suggested a family vacation to Italy. To bring us all closer, she said during one of our increasingly rare family dinners. We've all been so busy and disconnected lately. Jack immediately warmed to the idea. Mom, you always talked about visiting Italy. Remember how you and Dad planned to go for your 30th anniversary? The mention of Richard and our unfulfilled plans touched my heart. Perhaps this was their way of bridging the growing distance between us. We could visit Rome, Florence, and then spend some time in Tuscany, Grace continued, showing me stunning photos on her tablet. A real family bonding experience. When the conversation turned to finances, I offered to contribute what I could. That what I could turned into paying for almost 70% of the trip costs. I justified it as an investment in our family bonds, a chance to create lasting memories with my only child. In the weeks leading up to the trip, I threw myself into preparations. I downloaded language learning apps and practiced Italian phrases every night. I researched every museum, cathedral, and historical site in our itinerary, filling a notebook with interesting facts to share. I wanted to be an asset on this trip, not a burden. I spent hours selecting meaningful gifts for Jack and Grace to open during different parts of our journey. A leather journal for Jack, embossed with the coordinates of Richard's hometown in Italy. A delicate gold bracelet for Grace, featuring charms related to our destinations. I wrapped each present, carefully imagining their faces when they opened them. The night before our departure, I could barely sleep. After years of dreaming about Italy, I was finally going. But more importantly, I believed this trip would heal whatever had fractured in our family. As I packed my final items, I felt genuine hope for the first time in months. This vacation would bring back the warm, loving relationship I once had with my son and daughter-in-law. I was absolutely certain of it. Our problems started almost immediately after landing at Rome's Fiumicino airport. While I was grateful to be in Italy at last, the jet lag hit me hard after the overnight flight. Grace, however, seemed irritatingly fresh and energetic as she complained about the hotel I had helped choose. I can't believe we're staying in this neighborhood, she muttered, as our taxi pulled up to the modest but charming hotel in Trastevere. It's so far from the designer shops. But it's walking distance to wonderful restaurants and historic sites, I said, trying to maintain my enthusiasm. The reviews said it has authentic character. Grace rolled her eyes at Jack, who gave her a slight nod. It was the first of many silent communications I would notice between them on this trip. During check-in, I noticed them whispering to each other. When I approached, they abruptly stopped talking. Jack forced a smile and asked if I needed help with my luggage. I declined, wanting to prove I could manage on my own. Our first dinner in Rome set the tone for what was to come. We found a lovely trattoria with outdoor seating perfect for people watching on the cobblestone streets. When the waiter arrived, Grace ordered for all of us without asking what I wanted. She got you the pasta with marinara, Jack explained when I looked confused. You like marinara sauce, right, Mom? I did, but I had been looking forward to trying the local specialty the couple at the next table was enjoying. Too tired to make an issue of it, I simply nodded and sipped my water. You know, Deanna, Grace said, eyeing my travel outfit, we should take you shopping tomorrow. Those tourist clothes scream American, and that fanny pack has to go. It's not a fanny pack, I corrected gently. It's a travel security belt under my shirt for my passport and extra cash. The travel guide recommended it. Grace laughed as though I'd said something ridiculous. No one uses those anymore. It makes your shirt bulge oddly. Jack said nothing to defend me, staring intently at his phone instead. This became another pattern during our trip. Whenever Grace made cutting remarks about my appearance, my pace of walking, or my questions to locals in my rudimentary Italian, Jack would suddenly find something fascinating on his phone. The next morning, we visited the Vatican museums. I had been looking forward to seeing the Sistine Chapel for decades. As we approached Michelangelo's masterpiece, Jack's phone rang. He stepped away talking in low tones for nearly 15 minutes. By the time he returned, Grace had rushed me through the chapel complaining about the crowds. I barely had time to glimpse the famous ceiling before we were moving to the next area. This pattern repeated throughout the day. During our visit to the Colosseum, Jack took 3 separate work calls, missing most of the tour I had specifically booked because it offered excellent historical context. At the Trevi Fountain, Grace insisted on taking dozens of photos of herself, then refused to take one of Jack and me together. That evening, I discovered that Grace had secretly upgraded their room to a suite, but had left me in the basic room we had originally booked. When I mentioned this over breakfast the next morning, Grace shrugged. "Jack tosses and turns too much. We needed more space," she said casually. "Besides, you're alone, so the standard room should be fine for you." On our 4th day in Rome, I developed mild food poisoning after eating at a restaurant. Grace had insisted upon, despite the mediocre reviews I had found. I spent most of the night in the bathroom of my small hotel room. When I messaged Jack to say I might need to rest in the morning, Grace replied from his phone suggesting I was exaggerating and that we had expensive skip-the-line tickets for the Borghese Gallery. Feeling guilty about potentially ruining their plans, I dragged myself along, stopping every few exhibits to sit down or find a restroom. Grace made a show of checking her watch whenever this happened. "Some people just don't have the constitution for international travel," she remarked loudly to Jack as I returned from one such bathroom break. An elderly Italian woman nearby shot her a disapproving look. As our time in Rome continued, I noticed that all the family activities I had researched and suggested kept getting rescheduled or shortened. The cooking class I had prepaid for was canceled because Grace suddenly remembered a virtual work meeting. The evening walk through the illuminated ancient ruins was cut short because Jack and Grace wanted to try a rooftop bar they'd heard about from another American couple at the hotel. "You go back and rest," Jack suggested, not meeting my eyes. "This place stays open late, and the music might be too loud for you anyway." The most hurtful incident in Rome came during our final day there. We had planned to visit the Spanish Steps and then have lunch in a small family-owned restaurant I had carefully selected for its authentic Roman cuisine. Jack and Grace asked me to save a table while they took a few photos at a nearby shop. After waiting for over 3 hours, calling repeatedly, and sending increasingly worried texts, they finally appeared, shopping bags in hand. "Sorry, we ran into some people from Grace's company and got catching up," Jack explained without much contrition. "We assumed you'd order lunch for yourself." I hadn't, since most of my cash was with Jack, who had offered to exchange our dollars at a bank offering better rates than the airport. I had been sitting with only a glass of water, increasingly embarrassed as the restaurant owner kept checking if I was ready to order. The next day, as we prepared to leave Rome for Tuscany, I realized my blood pressure medication wasn't in my toiletry bag. Grace had borrowed the bag the night before for some cotton swabs. "Did you see my prescription bottle?" I asked as we were about to depart for the train station. "Oh, no," Grace said, her concern seemingly genuine. "I think it might still be in the bathroom at the hotel. We don't have time to go back now, or we'll miss our train. Can you go without it for a day? We can find a pharmacy in Montepulciano." Having no real choice, I agreed, though skipping doses of my medication wasn't recommended. As we settled onto the train, I couldn't shake the feeling that the accident might not have been entirely accidental. The thought made me uncomfortable, and I pushed it aside as unworthy. They were my family. Surely they wouldn't deliberately make things difficult for me. But as I watched them whispering and laughing together across the train compartment, occasionally glancing in my direction, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't the family bonding experience I had envisioned. Something was very wrong, and I was beginning to fear that the worst was yet to come. Montepulciano was everything I had dreamed Tuscany would be. Terracotta rooftops cascaded down the hillside vineyards, stretched to the horizon, and the air carried the scent of cypress trees and distant lavender. Under different circumstances, it would have been magical. We checked into a small villa I had carefully selected for its balance of authenticity and comfort. It had 3 bedrooms, a stone patio overlooking the valley, and was within walking distance of the town center. I had thought it would be perfect for our 5-day stay in the region. On our first morning, we joined a walking tour of local vineyards with a small group of other tourists. The pace was leisurely, with frequent stops for photos and explanations about the wine-making process. Still, I found myself falling slightly behind the group on the uphill sections. My knee had been giving me trouble since Rome, though I had done my best not to mention it. "Can we please pick up the pace?" Grace said loudly enough for the guide and other tourists to hear. "Some of us want to actually see everything before sunset." The guide, a kind, middle-aged Italian man named Paolo, immediately offered, "Perhaps we take a small break. The view from here she is magnificent." Grace rolled her eyes dramatically. "We're paying for a tour, not a senior citizen rest period." I felt my face flush with embarrassment as other members of the group looked away uncomfortably. Jack, standing slightly apart, examined a vine as though it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. By lunchtime, the tension was palpable. We stopped at a small restaurant in a vineyard where tables were set up under a pergola draped with wisteria. It should have been idyllic. The restaurant owner explained each dish, with passion describing local ingredients and traditional preparations. When he left our table, Grace immediately began complaining about the limited menu. "Not everyone wants peasant food," she muttered. "Would it kill them to have a normal salad?" "I think it's wonderful they're preserving traditional recipes," I said, trying to salvage some enjoyment from the experience. "This is what we came for, isn't it? Authentic Italy." "Actually," Jack interjected, looking at his phone, "I was thinking we might change our plans for tomorrow. There's a designer outlet about an hour away. Grace really wants to check it out." "But tomorrow is our scheduled tour of the medieval towns," I reminded him. "We've already paid deposits for San Gimignano and Siena. I've been looking forward to seeing the towers and the Palio Square." "Mom, we're on vacation," Jack said with growing irritation. "We don't have to stick to a rigid itinerary every single day." "But the itinerary was what we all agreed to," I persisted. "I specifically asked if you both wanted to make changes before I made these bookings." Grace put down her fork with a clatter. "The problem is that this entire trip has been micromanaged to death. Every minute scheduled, every restaurant researched to death. It's suffocating. I just wanted everything to be special," I said quietly. "This is a trip I've dreamed about for decades." "Well, not everything is about you and your decades-old dreams," Grace snapped. "Some of us want to actually enjoy our vacation instead of turning it into a history lecture." The table fell silent. Even Grace seemed to realize she had gone too far. Jack cleared his throat awkwardly and suggested we order dessert. I declined, my appetite gone. As the meal progressed, Grace drank 3 glasses of wine in quick succession. Her voice grew louder, her comments more cutting. When I suggested we might want to return to the villa for a short rest before the evening's activities, she erupted. This trip would be perfect if we didn't have to drag around Jack's needy mother, she hissed loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Every single thing revolves around your comfort, your interests, your pace. It's pathetic. Grace Jack warned, finally showing some backbone. That's enough. But instead of defending me, he turned to me with a pained expression. Maybe you should go back to the hotel if you can't keep up Mom. We can meet later for dinner. In that moment, something broke inside me. My son, my only child, the person I had sacrificed everything for, was choosing his wife's cruelty over my feelings. I stood up, legs shaking. I think I'll take a walk in the town square, I said, with as much dignity as I could muster. I'll see you both back at the villa later. No one tried to stop me as I left the restaurant. No one called after me or followed to make sure I was okay. I walked slowly into Montepulciano's main square, found a bench facing the ancient town hall, and finally allowed myself to cry. Tourists passed by averting their eyes from the elderly American woman sobbing alone. After about an hour, I collected myself. Whatever was happening with Jack and Grace, I needed to address it directly. Perhaps we could salvage the remainder of the trip. I decided to return to the restaurant and find them or head back to the villa if they had already left. But when I returned to the restaurant, our table was empty. Thinking they might have finished lunch and continued with the tour group, I asked Paolo, the guide, who was still there with the remainder of the group. "Your family?" he asked, his expression uncomfortable. "They leave maybe 45 minutes ago. They ask for taxi. Very much in hurry." A sense of unease crept over me as I thanked him and began the 15-minute walk back to our villa. Perhaps they had returned there concerned about me, but deep down, I already knew something was wrong. The villa's front door was unlocked. Inside, Jack and Grace's room was empty. Their luggage was gone. In my room, my smaller bag remained on the bed, but my larger suitcase, the one containing most of my clothes, my passport, and my return ticket documentation, was missing. My hands trembling, I pulled out my phone to call Jack. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried Grace with the same result. I sent text messages to both of them asking what was happening. No response. As panic began to set in, my phone pinged with a message from Jack, "Need some space. Meet us back in Rome in 3 days. Left your medication in bathroom." I stared at the message in disbelief. They had abandoned me in a small foreign town where I barely spoke the language. They had taken my passport, most of my belongings, and apparently expected me to find my own way back to Rome 3 hours away by train. As the reality of my situation sank in, the villa's phone rang. It was the owner calling to confirm that we had indeed checked out early as my son had informed them. According to Jack, his elderly mother had changed her mind about staying in Tuscany, and they were all returning to Rome immediately. "But, Signora, if you are still here, you must pay for additional nights," the confused owner explained. The sun was beginning to set over the Tuscan hills as I stood in the half-empty villa, my mind racing. I had limited cash since Jack had been keeping most of our euros for safekeeping. My credit card was in my other suitcase, along with my passport. Night was falling in a town where I knew no one had no secure lodging and couldn't effectively communicate. I had never felt so utterly alone and betrayed in my entire life. The reality of my situation became clearer as darkness fell over Montepulciano. I had about 70 euros in my purse. No passport, no credit cards, and no confirmed place to stay. The villa owner had reluctantly allowed me to remain for one more night after I explained my situation as best I could with my limited Italian, but made it clear I would need to pay or leave the following day. With few options, I walked back to the town center, hoping to find an internet cafe or somewhere with free Wi-Fi to research my options. Most businesses were closing for the evening, shopkeepers, pulling down metal shutters, restaurant staff, setting up for dinner service. At a small cafe on the corner of the main square, a middle-aged woman was wiping down outdoor tables. She looked up as I approached, immediately noticing my distress. "Signora, you are okay?" she asked, in heavily accented English. The simple kindness in her voice nearly undid me. I managed to explain that I needed internet access to contact my embassy, fighting back tears. "I am Sophia," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "You come inside. We have Wi-Fi, and you need espresso, I think. Or perhaps something stronger." Over the next hour, sitting in the back of her nearly empty cafe, I told Sophia my story. Despite the language barrier, she understood the essence of what had happened. Her expressions shifted from concern to disbelief to outrage. "Family does not do this," she stated firmly, refilling my cup with strong Italian coffee. "Not to Mama, not to Nana. This is not right." Sophia's simple validation of my feelings was the first comfort I'd had since being abandoned. When I mentioned I needed affordable lodging, she immediately made a phone call speaking rapid Italian. After hanging up, she smiled. "My cousin Lucia, she has small pensione. 3 rooms only, very simple but clean. Good price for you. I take you there when we close." The pensione turned out to be 3 guest rooms above a bakery run by Sophia's cousin Lucia and her husband. The room was indeed simple, with a narrow bed, worn but clean linens, and a shared bathroom down the hall. But it was secure, affordable, and came with Lucia's promise of breakfast. The next morning, after a night of fitful sleep, I went with Sophia to the local police station. The officer's English was limited, but Sophia helped translate. Unfortunately, their response was disappointing. "Is family matter," the officer explained with a shrug. "No crime if son decide to travel separate. For passport, you must contact American consulate in Florence." Sophia, seeing my dejection, patted my hand. "We try different way. My nephew Marco, he is lawyer in Siena. He helps tourists sometimes. I call him—" Back at the pensione, Lucia allowed me to use the ancient desktop computer in their small office. I logged into my email account and sent messages to the American consulate explaining my situation. Then, with growing dread, I checked my bank accounts. What I discovered sent a wave of nausea through me. There had been several large withdrawals from our joint account over the past week. Money I had added to cover our travel expenses was nearly gone. A cash advance had been taken against my credit card, which explained why Jack had been keeping it safe for me. My hands shaking, I tried calling Jack again. Voicemail. I left a message asking directly about the withdrawals. No response. I sent text messages that showed as delivered but remained unanswered. Out of desperation, I checked social media. There on Grace's Instagram were photos posted just hours earlier. Jack and Grace smiling in front of Venice's Rialto Bridge. Grace showing off a new leather handbag with the caption, "Italian shopping therapy." They looked happy, carefree, as if they hadn't just abandoned an elderly family member in a foreign country. Over the next 2 days, a routine developed. Mornings were spent using Lucia's computer, reaching out to the consulate, researching emergency passport procedures, and monitoring my bank accounts for further unauthorized activities. Afternoons, I helped Sophia at her cafe in exchange for meals, simple tasks like folding napkins or arranging flowers on tables. Evenings were spent on the pensionee's small balcony with Sophia after her cafe closed, sharing stories despite our language limitations. Sophia introduced me to her grandmother, Nonna Giovanna, a tiny, sharp-eyed woman of 92 who lived in an apartment above the cafe. Through Sophia's translation, Nana shared her own story of family betrayal, how her son's wife had gradually turned him against her, eventually taking control of the family olive grove that should have provided for Nana's old age. Nona says heart heals, but wisdom comes after pain. Sophia translated. She says you are strong woman, American strong. On the third day, Sophia's nephew Marco arrived from Siena. A serious young man in a slightly too large suit, he spoke excellent English and had already contacted colleagues about my situation. The emergency passport is possible but takes time, he explained. 1 week, maybe more. But there is another option, your return ticket. It is electronic, yes. If son has physical copy, no matter. We can print new one with booking reference. Marco helped me access my email records, finding the original booking confirmation from the airline. With this, we were able to confirm my return flight from Rome to Boston was still valid. The challenge would be getting back to Rome without identification for the train, and then navigating the airport with emergency documentation rather than a proper passport. I help with train, Sophia insisted. My brother drives delivery van to Rome 2 times each week. You go with him tomorrow. Safe, no need passport, for private car. That evening, as I sat with Sophia, Lucia, Marco, and Nana Giovanna in the cafe after closing, something shifted inside me. The crushing hurt remained, but alongside it grew something else: determination. These strangers had shown me more kindness than my own family. They had reminded me that I was not helpless, not despite my age, but because of it. I had survived 6 decades of life's challenges. I would survive this too. I've made a decision, I announced to my small circle of Italian supporters. I'm not going to wait in Rome for Jack and Grace. I'm going directly back to America. Sophia translated for her grandmother, who nodded approvingly and said something that made everyone smile. Nona says Sophia translated, the best revenge is to be waiting at home when they return, sitting in your chair like a queen on throne. For the first time since being abandoned in Montepulciano, I laughed genuinely. The image of myself as a throne-sitting queen awaiting the return of my disloyal subjects was oddly empowering. The next morning, with a small care package of bread and cheese from Lucia, a handwritten note of introduction to Sophia's brother's friend, who worked at the Rome airport, and the precious printout of my flight information, I left Montepulciano in a delivery van filled with wine and olive oil, bound for restaurants in Rome. Sophia hugged me tightly before I climbed into the van. "You remember, Deanna?" she said firmly. "Your son, he is grown man who made bad choice. Not your failure, his failure." As the van wound down the hill away from Montepulciano, I watched the medieval town recede in the distance. I had come to Italy seeking family connection and fulfillment of a lifelong dream. I was leaving with neither of those things, but perhaps with something more valuable: a newfound sense of my own resilience, and a clarity about my relationship with Jack and Grace that no amount of denial could have given me. They had shown me who they truly were. Now it was time to show them who I truly was. And that woman was not someone to be discarded and forgotten in a foreign country. The journey home was a blur of anxiety paperwork and small kindnesses from strangers. Sophia's brother Antonio dropped me at the American Embassy in Rome, where I spent hours explaining my situation, filling out forms and waiting for emergency travel documents. The embassy staff had seen similar cases before, which was both comforting, I wasn't alone, and disturbing. This happens to other families too. With temporary travel documents in hand and a security letter for the airline, I boarded my flight to Boston the following day. The relief of settling into my seat was overwhelming. After takeoff, I finally allowed myself to truly process what had happened, Jack and Grace hadn't just abandoned me. They had deliberately planned it, taking my passport and credit cards to ensure I would be stranded. The betrayal went beyond thoughtlessness into calculated cruelty. My apartment door looked exactly as I had left it 2 weeks earlier, but everything else felt different. I was different. As I inserted my key, I noticed several days' worth of mail had been pushed through the slot onto the floor. Dropping my borrowed carry-on bag, I gathered the envelopes and began sorting through them. Among the usual bills and advertisements were several financial notices that immediately raised alarms. A credit card statement for an account I didn't recognize. A letter from a mortgage company I had never done business with. A notice from the property tax office about a change of assessment request. After a shower and change of clothes, I called my bank to report the unauthorized withdrawals I had discovered in Italy. The customer service representative asked security questions, then paused. "Mrs. Roberts, there have been multiple attempts to access your retirement accounts as well. Someone tried to initiate a transfer last week, but couldn't complete the security verification." That would have been while I was in Italy, I said, my hands gripping the phone tightly. What information did they have? They had your social security number, date of birth, and mother's maiden name. They failed at the additional security question about your first pet's name. The invasion went deeper than I had imagined. I spent the next several hours placing fraud alerts on my accounts, changing passwords, and trying to understand the extent of the financial exploitation. The following morning, still jet-lagged, but determined, I called Thomas Abernathy, my late husband, Richard's college roommate, and a retired attorney who specialized in elder law. He agreed to meet me for lunch. "I always thought Grace was a piece of work," Thomas said, after I recounted the Italy disaster and subsequent discoveries. "But this goes beyond entitlement into potential criminal territory, Deanna." "What are my options?" I asked, pushing my barely touched sandwich aside. Thomas considered for a moment. "The house is key. You said you're on the deed as co-owner, not just a guarantor, correct?" I nodded. It was Grace's suggestion, actually. She probably thought it just meant you were helping with the mortgage approval, but co-ownership gives you equal rights to the property. They can't sell it, refinance it, or even legally change the locks without your consent. "So, what does that mean in practical terms?" I asked. "It means leverage," Thomas said, his expression serious. "But before we discuss that, we need to gather evidence. Bank records, credit reports, any documentation of communications about the Italy trip. We need to establish a pattern of exploitation." Over the next week, I became a detective in my own life. I requested bank statements, going back 2 years, finding a disturbing pattern of increasing loans to Jack and Grace that they had promised to repay, but never did. Credit reports revealed 2 accounts opened in my name without my knowledge. I found emails and text messages discussing the Italy trip, including exchanges where Grace specifically asked Jack to make sure I brought my good credit cards with high limits. Most disturbing was what I found when searching Jack's name online. A local real estate listing showed our house with a status of coming soon, with a projected listing date just after our scheduled return from Italy. They had been planning to sell the house out from under me. Further research revealed a troubling history for Grace. Through social media connections and some careful conversations with mutual acquaintances, I learned she had been briefly married before meeting Jack, leaving her previous husband financially drained after just 18 months of marriage. She had also been estranged from her own parents for years, though she had told Jack they were deceased. Thomas helped me document everything, methodically building a comprehensive file of evidence. The legal term for what they've done is elder abuse and financial exploitation, he explained during one of our strategy meetings. But proving it in court could be messy and drag on for months. I don't want a court battle, I said. I want my house and my dignity. Then we used the leverage of potential legal consequences to negotiate, Thomas advised. Sometimes the threat of exposure is more effective than actual litigation. 2 days before Jack and Grace were scheduled to return from their extended European vacation, I made a disturbing discovery in the main house. Using my key, I entered to retrieve some personal documents I kept in a filing cabinet in what was supposed to be my occasional guest room. The room had been completely transformed into a home gym, with my filing cabinet nowhere to be seen. After searching, I found my files in the basement, many of the folders showing water damage from a recent pipe leak. Among the damaged documents were my original deed to the house, my will, and irreplaceable photos of Richard that I had kept in a special envelope. As I stood in the basement, holding the water-stained photo of Richard holding baby Jack in the hospital, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about respect, about family, about the value of a life dedicated to caring for others. With grim determination, I activated the security camera system I had installed in my garage apartment after several items had gone missing last year. Reviewing the footage from before our trip, I found multiple instances of Jack and Grace entering my space when I wasn't home. In one particularly damning video, Grace could be seen opening my mail and taking documents from my desk. Armed with this evidence, I contacted a locksmith. As the legal co-owner of the property, I had every right to change the locks. I also called a security company to update the house alarm system with new codes. The final piece fell into place when Thomas connected me with a young attorney from his former firm who specialized in elder protection cases. She helped me prepare legal papers requiring Jack and Grace to vacate the property based on documented financial exploitation, unauthorized use of personal information, and abandonment in a foreign country. They're going to be shocked, the attorney warned. People who do these things never expect consequences. They'll likely try to paint you as confused, vindictive, or mentally unstable. Let them try, I said, surprising myself with my calm resolve. I have documentation for everything, including their social media posts from Venice while I was stranded in Tuscany without a passport. On the day before their scheduled return, I moved back into the main house, settling into the master bedroom they had taken over years ago, despite our original agreement that it would remain a shared family space. I placed framed photos of Richard around the room, reclaiming our family history that Grace had gradually erased. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what had been lost, anger at the betrayal, but most surprisingly, a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. Jack and Grace had intended to teach me a lesson about dependency by abandoning me in Italy. Instead, they had taught me a powerful lesson about self-reliance and boundaries. Tomorrow they would return, expecting to find a chastened, grateful mother willing to overlook their tough love approach. Instead, they would find a woman who had rediscovered her strength and was prepared to reclaim what was rightfully hers. As I drifted off to sleep, I pictured Sophia's grandmother, Nonna Giovanna, sitting regally in her chair above the cafe in Montepulciano. Like a queen on throne, she had said through Sophia's translation. Tomorrow, that's exactly what I would be. The morning of their return, I was ready. Thomas had arranged for his nephew, a former police officer who now worked private security, to be present when Jack and Grace arrived. I didn't anticipate physical confrontation, but the emotional safeguard of having a neutral third-party witness seemed prudent. I wore my best outfit, a tailored navy dress and pearls that Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary. My hair was freshly styled makeup, carefully applied. I wanted to look strong, composed, and utterly in control. The dining room table was covered with neatly organized documents, bank statements, credit reports, photographs of the water-damaged files and printouts of their social media posts from Italy, time-stamped during my abandonment. The security cameras showed their taxi pulling up at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. I watched on the monitor as they dragged their luggage toward the front door, Grace laughing at something Jack said. They looked tanned, relaxed, entirely unburdened by what they had done. The moment their key failed to open the new locks was visible in their body language. Confusion, then. Irritation. Jack tried again, jiggling the key forcefully. Grace put down her shopping bags with an impatient gesture. Finally, Jack rang the doorbell. I nodded to Thomas's nephew, who opened the door, while I remained standing in the foyer, visible but not approaching. "Who are you?" Grace demanded, trying to push past him. "What are you doing in our house?" "I'm Martin Abernathy, licensed security," he said calmly, showing identification. "I've been retained by the property owner." Property owner Jack looked past him and saw me. "Mom, what's going on? Why are the locks changed?" "Please come in," I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "We have a lot to discuss." Their confusion quickly morphed into defensive anger as they entered the foyer. Grace looked around wildly, noticing the changes I had made, the removal of her decorative touches, the return of family photos she had banished to closets. "What have you done?" she hissed. "This is our house." "Actually," I replied, "this is my house too. I'm a legal co-owner, as you well know, since you suggested putting my name on the deed, Grace." Jack stepped forward, adopting the patronizing tone he had used increasingly in recent years. "Mom, if this is about what happened in Italy, we can explain. We thought some independence would be good for you. You've become so dependent on us for everything." "Independence," I repeated, amazed at his audacity. "Is that what you call taking my passport credit cards and abandoning me in a foreign country where I don't speak the language? Is that what you call emptying our joint bank account and attempting to access my retirement funds while I was stranded?" The color drained from Jack's face. "What are you talking about? We just needed some alone time. We knew you'd be fine." I gestured toward the dining room. "Please sit down. I have evidence I'd like to review with you both." Grace refused to move. "This is ridiculous. We don't have to listen to this. Jack, tell your mother she's being hysterical." "Actually, Mrs. Roberts has been remarkably composed," Martin interjected, "and as a licensed security professional who has worked with law enforcement, I would advise you both to hear what she has to say." Reluctantly, they followed me to the dining room. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented the evidence of their actions: the financial exploitation, the identity theft, the property damage, and finally the documented abandonment in Italy. "You accessed my personal accounts, attempted to steal my retirement funds, planned to sell this house out from under me, and left me without identification in a foreign country," I concluded. "In what world is that acceptable treatment of anyone, let alone your mother?" Jack had grown increasingly pale as I presented each piece of evidence. Grace, however, became more agitated and defensive. "You're twisting everything," she exclaimed, slamming her hand on the table. "We've done nothing but take care of your needy, clingy, pathetic self for years. One little lesson about independence, and you pull this melodramatic stunt. A lesson, I repeated quietly. Is that what stealing my passport was supposed to be? We didn't steal anything, Jack finally spoke, his voice uncertain. We thought. You thought I would be so desperate to reconcile that I would overlook everything I finished for him. You thought there would be no consequences. This is our house, Grace insisted, changing tactics. We've been paying the mortgage for years. After I provided 60% of the down payment and improved the property with my apartment conversion, I countered. And as these bank records show, I've been covering your shortfalls on the mortgage at least once per quarter for the past 3 years. I slid a folder across the table containing legal papers. These are documents requiring you to vacate this property within 30 days based on documented financial exploitation and elder abuse. Jack picked up the papers with trembling hands. Mom, you can't be serious. Where would we go? That's not my concern, I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. You both have good jobs. You'll figure it out, just like I had to figure out how to get home from Italy without a passport. Grace's tactics shifted from indignation to manipulation. Deanna, I know we've had our differences, but this is extreme. Jack is your only son, your only family. Would Richard want you to throw away your relationship with his son over a misunderstanding? The mention of Richard's name in her mouth sparked a cold fury in me. Don't you dare invoke my husband's name. Richard valued integrity above all else. He would be ashamed of what Jack has become under your influence. Under my influence, Grace's voice rose to a shriek. Jack, are you going to let her talk about me like that? Tell her she's being crazy. Jack looked trapped between two forces. Mom, maybe we can work something out. We'll pay you back for Italy. We'll make it right. It's too late for that, I said. I've seen who you both truly are now. I won't be manipulated or exploited any longer. Grace stormed around the table toward me, finger-pointing. You ungrateful old woman. After everything we've done for you, you were nothing but a burden on this trip. Complaining, slow, embarrassing us in front of everyone. Martin stepped forward, his presence, a silent reminder that this confrontation wouldn't be allowed to escalate further. I think we should take a break, he suggested firmly. Mrs. Roberts has made her position clear. You both have the legal documents and should consult an attorney if you wish. This isn't over, Grace snarled, grabbing her purse. Jack, we're leaving. Your mother is clearly having some kind of breakdown. We'll get a lawyer and fight this. Jack hesitated, looking between Grace and me. For a moment I saw a flicker of the son I had raised the boy, who had once valued honesty and kindness. Mom, he began, his voice quieter, I never meant for things to go this far. But they did go this far, Jack, I replied. You chose this path with every decision, every time you stood by, while Grace belittled me every time you helped deceive me. Those weren't accidents. Something in my words seemed to reach him, but then Grace called sharply from the doorway. Jack. Now. With one last conflicted look at me, he followed her. Martin escorted them while they collected overnight items from their luggage, then saw them out. Through the window, I watched them arguing in the driveway before getting into a rideshare vehicle. As they drove away, I felt an overwhelming wave of emotion, not the triumph I had expected, but a profound grief for what had been lost, for the relationship I had believed in that had proven to be an illusion. Over the next 3 weeks, their attempts to regain control took many forms. First came the flying monkeys, mutual friends and distant relatives, who called to tell me I was overreacting, that family disagreements shouldn't lead to such drastic measures. I calmly directed them to Thomas if they wanted the full story. Next came the legal threats. Their attorney, a young man clearly out of his depth, once he saw the evidence Thomas presented, suggested family mediation instead of pursuing their baseless claims of my mental incompetence. Finally came Jack's attempt at reconciliation, a carefully worded letter suggesting I might be partially right about some things, but still insisting that the Italy abandonment had been a misunderstanding not deliberately planned. The most painful moment came when they returned with a moving truck to collect their belongings. Grace remained in their car, refusing to enter the house. Jack moved methodically from room to room, supervised by Martin. In the master bedroom, he paused by a photo of himself as a child with Richard and me at Fenway Park. "I really messed up, didn't I?" he asked quietly, more statement than question. "Yes, you did," I replied without heat. "I don't know how things got so far off track," he continued. "When I met Grace, I thought she was everything I wanted. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Lost who Dad raised me to be." "That's something you'll need to figure out for yourself," I said. "But not here, not in this house." "I never thought you'd actually stand up to us like this," he admitted. "You always gave in before." "That was my mistake," I acknowledged. "One I won't repeat." As he prepared to leave with the last of their belongings, Jack turned at the door. "For what it's worth, I am sorry, Mom. Not just because it didn't work out the way we planned, but because I hurt you. I can see that now." "I believe you might be sorry, Jack," I replied. "But it's too little too late." After the moving truck pulled away, I walked through the suddenly empty feeling house, touching walls, adjusting pictures, reclaiming spaces. The confrontation had been necessary, the boundaries essential. But victory, I was discovering, could feel remarkably like loss when it came to family. That evening alone, in the house that was now truly mine again, I poured a glass of wine and raised it in a silent toast to Richard, to Sophia, and her family in Montepulciano, and most importantly to the woman I had rediscovered when everything was taken away, the woman who had found her way home and reclaimed what was rightfully hers. The first month alone in the house was the hardest. Without the constant underlying tension of navigating Grace's moods and Jack's divided loyalties, the silence felt both liberating and oppressive. I wandered from room to room, touching furniture, opening windows, gradually reclaiming spaces that had become foreign to me over the years. Some nights I questioned my decisions. Had I been too harsh? Should I have tried harder to reconcile? The doubt would creep in around dusk when the house grew especially quiet. But then I would remember the feeling of standing alone in that Italian town square, betrayed and abandoned, and my resolve would strengthen once more. Thomas checked on me regularly, bringing casseroles from his wife and updates on the legal aftermath. Jack and Grace had separated 3 weeks after moving out, unable to afford a comparable living situation and apparently blaming each other for the loss of the house. Grace moved in with a coworker, Thomas reported during one of his visits. Jack's staying on someone's couch. Their credit was already stretched thin with all those designer purchases. Without your financial cushion, the house of cards collapsed pretty quickly. I felt no satisfaction at their hardship, only a hollow sadness for what could have been. "What happens now?" I asked. "That's entirely up to you, Deanna," Thomas replied. "The legal matters are settled. The house is secured in your name only now. Your finances are protected. The rest is about healing." Healing proved to be a nonlinear process. Some days I felt strong and at peace with my decisions. Other days, memories would ambush me, the smell of Jack's favorite cookies, baking a TV show we used to watch together, the Father's Day cards stored in my keepsake box. 6 weeks after the confrontation, I found a flyer for a support group called Reclaiming Life After Family Estrangement at my doctor's office. With trepidation, I attended the next meeting at a community center downtown. The circle of chairs held people of all ages and backgrounds, each with stories of betrayal by those who should have loved them most. Some had been estranged for decades. Others were in the raw, early stages like me. A woman named Eleanor, whose daughter had stolen her life savings, became my first new friend. The hardest part, Eleanor confided during coffee after one meeting, is letting go of the relationship you thought you had, grieving the illusion. Her words resonated deeply. I wasn't just grieving the loss of Jack in the present, but the loss of the relationship I had believed, in all those years the son I thought I had raised, the family bonds I had trusted were unbreakable. As spring arrived, I channeled my energy into transforming the house. I hired contractors to convert Jack and Grace's former master suite into my own new bedroom, unable to sleep any longer in the room where Richard and I had once been happy. I donated their abandoned furniture and redecorated with colors and styles that pleased me, no longer worrying about Grace's criticism of my outdated tastes. The garage apartment where I had been relegated was repurposed as a guest suite, which initially stood empty until Eleanor suggested I might consider renting it to a student or young professional. Having young energy around can be healing, she advised. Just be careful to check references thoroughly this time. After careful screening, I welcomed Lynn, a doctoral student in linguistics at Boston University, into the apartment. She was quiet, respectful of boundaries, and brought an unexpected brightness to my life. Occasionally, she would join me for tea-sharing stories of her studies or her family back in Taiwan. She helped me set up video chats with Sophia in Italy, patiently teaching me to use technology I had avoided. Through these conversations with Sophia, I maintained a connection to the place where I had experienced both betrayal and unexpected kindness. Sophia's cafe was thriving, her English improving with each call. She had framed a photo of us together on her last day in Montepulciano and kept it behind the counter, telling customers the story of our friendship. "You come back to Italy someday," she insisted during one call. "Next time, better experience. You stay with my family. No son, no daughter-in-law, just good food, good wine, good friends." The idea of returning to Italy, once unthinkable after my traumatic experience, gradually became an appealing possibility, a way to reclaim the dream that had been tainted. As summer arrived, I volunteered to teach English as a second language classes at the community center. Working with immigrants and refugees who were navigating their own dislocations and rebuilding their lives gave me purpose and perspective. Many of my students had survived far worse betrayals and losses than mine, yet approached each day with remarkable resilience. Teacher Deanna, a Syrian grandfather named Hakim, told me after mastering past tense verbs in my country, we say, "Sometimes Allah must break your heart to make space for something new to grow." His words stayed with me, a different framing of my experience that felt true. The breaking had been necessary for new growth, painful as it was. Through the ESL program, I met Barbara, another teacher near my age, who had survived her own family heartbreak when her husband, of 30 years, left her for her best friend. We began walking together on weekends, sharing stories, and gradually building a friendship based on mutual understanding and respect. "Have you had any contact with Jack since the day they moved out?" Barbara asked during one of our walks along the harbor. "He sends emails sometimes," I admitted. "Short messages, updates about his life. He found a new job, his own apartment. He and Grace are divorcing." "And do you respond?" she asked gently. "Not yet," I said. "I'm not ready. Maybe someday, but the trust is broken. I'm still learning who he really is, who I really am, without the dynamics we fell into." Barbara nodded. "Forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. Sometimes it just means letting go of the anger so it doesn't consume you. By the 1-year anniversary of the Italy trip, I had created a new life that felt authentically mine. The house had become truly my home, filled with book club meetings, occasional dinners with new friends, and Lynn's gentle presence. My financial security was restored, and the legal protections Thomas had helped me put in place ensured I would never be vulnerable to exploitation again. A letter arrived from Jack on that anniversary. Unlike his previous attempts at communication, this one contained no justifications, no subtle blame shifting. It was a genuine acknowledgement of the harm he had caused, the trust he had broken, and the relationship he had damaged, perhaps beyond repair. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote. "I'm not even asking for it. I just want you to know that I understand now what I did, and I live with that regret every day. The man Dad raised me to be would never have treated his mother that way. I'm working to find that person again, though I know it doesn't change what happened." I placed the letter in my desk drawer, not ready to respond, but no longer feeling the sharp pain his name once evoked. The anger had gradually transformed into something more like sad acceptance, a recognition that people, even those we love most, can fail us profoundly. My healing journey had taught me this betrayal by family cuts deepest because it violates our most fundamental trust. But surviving that betrayal reveals strengths we never knew we possessed. In being abandoned, I had found my voice. In losing what I thought was my support system, I had built a more authentic one. In facing my greatest fear, being alone, I had discovered I was far stronger than I knew. Sophia's grandmother had been right. The heart heals, but wisdom comes after pain. My wisdom was hard-earned. True family is defined by actions, not blood. Boundaries are not selfish, but necessary. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-respect is to walk away from those who cannot value you properly, even when they share your name. As I sit here now in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that remind me of Tuscan evenings, I feel a peace I once thought impossible. The journey from abandonment to reclamation was not one I would have chosen, but it led me to a place of authentic living I might never have found otherwise. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who betrayed your trust? What helped you find healing afterward? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming life's unexpected challenges. And remember, sometimes the family we create through friendship and mutual respect is stronger than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to reclaim your own power if you ever face similar betrayals.